What stories can I tell myself when presented with an event that will lead me to the action that I know I need to take in order to get the results and create the life that I want? Those stories that you choose to tell yourself in that moment will dictate the actions you take and what your life becomes.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time. The reality is I've discovered that people are stuck more than anything else because of the stories that we tell themselves. And lo and behold, I dug into your new book and I'm totally digging it, totally vibing it. And I thought we could start there because you talk a lot about story there. So help us out.
Yeah. So, we're humans, right? Like anyone listening to the show is a human, and humans are programmed to tell stories, to hear stories. This is how we process the world. This is one of the things that is credited to our species evolving to where we are, is that we could take our experiences, our stories, and share them forward. And so then we could advise each other and grow as humankind. And we often think about storytelling in the stories that we tell outwardly, the stories we tell. You always think about the stories you tell at a campfire, the stories you tell at bedtime or at happy hour. But there's another form of story that happens on a regular basis. I mean, more times than we can count in any given day. And that is the stories we tell ourselves, where we essentially do the same thing that humans have been doing all along, which is collecting and curating our life's experiences, but we store them and we hold them and we subconsciously play those stories back to ourselves to, again, make sense of the world, our place in it, what we believe we can and cannot do. And really so if we know that that's happening, then that's the key to unlocking a lot of potential in each of us.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. One of the things that it dawned on me as I was kind of reading through the book was this essence of the character that we play in the story. Like who are we? Are we the villain? Are we the good guy, the bad guy? Are we the star? Or are we watching it like a narrator, all that kind of stuff? And I wanted you to speak to that a little bit, because I feel like there's a lot of insight there that can add a lot of value to anybody's life. Because a lot of times, like you were just mentioning, like there's this element of you're constantly judging yourself based on the story that you're telling yourself.
Yeah. And I think it's so much of what I really wanted to give people here, without really necessarily saying it explicitly, is the value of self-awareness. So self-awareness, as you said, of like, what character are we playing in this story? And to take it to another level, what if we were to play a different character? What if we were to see our role, our place in this story from a slightly different angle? Would it turn a story that we use as that makes us a victim, that makes us feel like we're less than? I mean, so many of those stories, we can shift ever so slightly and see those stories as moments of strength, of moments of what we overcame. And then when we retell ourselves those stories from that perspective, there's a lot we can do with that material. And I would argue that some of the most successful people that I've ever encountered, that I've ever met, are people who, they didn't put these words to it, but that they were very conscientious about the stories that happened to them and how they chose to see themselves in that story. And they chose to see themselves in an empowering light, which then allowed them to act from an empowered place.
Yeah, no, that's so good. It's one of the things that dawned on me when I was reading through the book. There's this element of this framework of this formula that you kind of came up with, like the event and response. Like, break that down a little bit, because I feel like that kind of plays right into learning to be self-aware, or learning to be I guess a proponent of how you're viewing or telling your story.
Yeah, it really is. So, and this was something that was really important to me, is for this to not be, I mean, how many of us have stacks and stacks of personal development books that are like, hey, just think positive or change your mindset, or, and all of them you finish reading and maybe you felt good while you were reading it, but weren't able to do anything with it. I really wanted people to be able to walk away from this with something that they could do. And this, what you mentioned right here, and I'm okay with giving it away. So we'll give this.
It's a highlighter book. So funny there, right?
Yeah. So lots of notes in the margins, or, get it on Audible and take notes on a piece of paper or in a journal. But this is really where it all begins, and where you can see that there is an action you can take here to truly make a difference. And so we often think that our lives happen in this very linear fashion, which isn't exactly false, but that there's an event, we react or we take action, and that leads to a certain result. And then, of course, over time, those results compound and we get our life. And those events could be even like decisions that we need to make. Maybe it's if you're just starting a business, maybe it's putting yourself out there, pitching to the local paper, cold calling a client, or reaching back out to, someone you met at a networking event and re-talking to them about what you offer. So that event, the action we take, it gets us our result, which is not untrue. However, there is this tiny, almost imperceptible slice of time that happens right between the action we take and the event. So, or if I were to do it in the order we've been discussing, like the decision to be made and the action we take, the event and the action. And that slice of time is where our stories occur. Now, most often these stories are subconscious, and most often, because of the way that humans are programmed, these stories are negative. It's, oh, well, you don't want to bother them because you're always a bother. So don't reach out to them right now because you'll bother them, or don't reach out to them because you don't have everything perfect. You don't know exactly what to say. So you should wait to reach out to them till you know exactly what to say. And so what action does that lead to? Inaction in many cases, or the wrong action. And then we wonder why we are stuck. So if we were to just, and again, this happens on autopilot, and you can let it remain on autopilot and move slowly along the course of your life, or stay right where you are if you're feeling really stuck, or you can take back control of that slice of time. And this is where the book really comes in, is, okay, these are the results I want to get, which is going to require this action. What stories can I tell myself when presented with an event that will lead me to the action that I know I need to take in order to get the results and create the life that I want? Those stories that you choose to tell yourself in that moment will dictate the actions you take and what your life becomes. And so becoming really aware, as you said, in that moment of, wait, why am I telling myself the story that I suck, or the story that I don't have enough experience, or the story of the time where I made a mistake because of my, years ago. And I'm still telling myself that even a decade later that I don't have the experience I need. Why am I telling myself those stories? Why not tell myself this set of stories that makes me feel good and powerful and leads to the action I want to take?
Yeah. Well, I want to maybe try to break it down a little bit this way, because one of the things I loved about the book is you said that most of these stories are kind of invisible.
Yeah.
Right? They're the story that within the story that you're not really paying attention to. Right. And I am curious. I mean, you're an incredibly successful speaker, one of the world-class, like top-notch stage performers in the world. You're incredibly gifted author, incredibly gifted in your profession, family life, the whole deal. What are some of those types of stories within the stories that you've had to overcome yourself to get yourself to the level that you currently are at?
Yeah. I mean, it is. And I will say, I would love for it to be that I wrote this book because I had it all figured out. That's simply not the case. All of us, we encounter these stopping points, and maybe we experience a period of growth where we're just like, where it feels like it's just all, or is who is it? Matthew McConaughey says, where it's just all green lights. But eventually, as you start bumping up against your belief limit, you will start bumping into some of those stories. So I've had a whole variety of stories that I've had to work through. Some I've pretty much overcome. So for a long time, I really struggled with fear of public speaking, which sounds crazy because
it does sound crazy, because for you guys who have not seen her on stage, I mean, really?
This is what I do. Like, this is what I mean, I have been speaking since I was a child, and yet be like, those moments right behind the curtain, right before you go out, or even in the hours or even days or sometimes weeks, depending on the nature of the event, all of a sudden these stories would be going in my head that said, you're not good enough. You don't have what it takes. This doesn't. And really where they were all coming from is stories of feeling like storytelling is silly, because that's my expertise. That's what I'm talking to people about. And I had the story of the time where I told a friend who I respected, I quit my job and I said, I'm going to teach people in business storytelling. And she said, who's, and I was launching this like program. It had DVD. This is back when it had DVDs. DVDs. I know. I'm dating myself. I was also updating my MySpace profile. But I had invested all this time and all this energy, all this hope, right? This was going to be my ticket out. And I told this friend who I really respect, that's what I was doing. I quit my job to teach people storytelling in business. And she looked at that point, all the DVDs were like laying out on the kitchen table. And she said, but who will buy this? Right. And so, so it was like there's been all these points in my life where it was like, well, storytelling is just kind of a hobby. It's a silly thing. Like that's not a real thing. So those stories, and they'd be really specific moments. I remember the color of that hideous kitchen table that my DVDs were all laid out on, right? I can remember it so clearly. And so those were the stories that subconsciously, I know now when I break it down, when I ask myself, what was causing this feeling? What was giving me such anxiety and fear? It was all of these moments that my subconscious had collected. And so what it did, now, ultimately, I would get out on a stage and I would be in my zone and I would do a great job. But these stories were making me miserable. Like I hated my life. I hated doing a job that I loved and that I'm really, really good at. And I hated it because my stories were making me miserable. And so that was a really important story. That was a really important limiting belief or thorn in my side or place of being stuck that I had to work on and find stories that I could tell myself that would silence. Well, that's the subtitle of the book, Silence the Inner Critic, so that I could breathe, like I could enjoy the thing that I'm really good at. So that was just one. And these stories, they appear in all areas of our life. They're there in relationships, in dating, in marriage, and relationships with your siblings. They're there for our money. Like how I just had an epiphany just this morning about money stories. It's too raw. I can't tell you. It's too raw.
There's the cliffhanger thing that's also in the book.
Yeah, exactly. But we have these are about our health and well-being. We are bumping up against stories all the time. And the better each of us can get at recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm bumping up against some old stories here. Yeah. What stories could I tell myself to get past it? The better off will be.
Yeah. Well, I want to hit this from two separate angles. I think first of all, I think you just brought it up. So it kind of triggers on my mind, which is the moment in which the negative story that we're telling ourselves now has confirmation bias through a friend. Mm-hmm. How do we push ourselves past that moment where we lean into the new story rather than just reconfirming the old story just because somebody we know, love, and trust is telling us that?
Yeah, I think that is one of the hardest things about it, because, and the reality is, sometimes the negative stories that are holding us back, it's not that they're untrue, right? It's not that it isn't real. It's not that you didn't make a mistake and lose a sale or, whatever it is. We can't. And that's why the book isn't change your story, change your life. It's choose your story. Because just as there are these negative stories or a friend or a family member, I just actually had my mother was in town. So here's a story. Okay. And life is busy. It's full. It's wonderful. We are running on all cylinders. My husband and I live in New York City. We have our two kids. They're doing we are.
And New York's back open again. So
New York is so open. So now on top of it, we're not just like sitting at home. There are shows to go to and restaurants to eat at. And so it's all of this. And it is a big, beautiful, very busy life. And my mother was in town, and my mother is retired. She and my father live at our cabin. They've made it their summer home,
cool.
right? Like
Yeah, that's cool.
no, they have things going on, but her life now and my life now, and even my life compared to her life when she was in this phase of life, look very different.
Yeah.
And she started saying things, she started questioning if maybe we were pushing our limits. Were we too frazzled? Was this? And she was bringing up old stories that I know of when I've pushed myself too hard and then I got really sick, or when and these are stories that, again, are not untrue, and they live within me. And sometimes I find myself bumping up against, am I doing too much? Am I pushing myself too hard? Am I right? And there are things that are like, maybe I shouldn't say yes to this. Maybe I should pull my ambitions back. And then it took me a moment. Like, it gave me this really funky feeling though. And that again goes into the awareness. Like, I suddenly just felt yuck. I was like, wait, something isn't right here. And that's another indicator that there are conflicting stories. And what I realized was she knew the stories from when I was in elementary school and high school, and because she was my mom. But she does not see the stories that happen on a daily basis. She doesn't see the things that I say no to. She doesn't see the very specific decision-making process that my husband and I have, or for what is best for our family, right? Like she is missing a lot of stories. So it really comes down to, back to that original question, is when you're getting confirmation of maybe some of the negative stories or beliefs that you have, is to be really intentional about going back and seeking out the stories that prove that that is no longer true, or the stories that support the belief that you want to hold, and then retell them to yourself, if no one else. But then for me, in that situation with my mother, I went back and told my mother those stories, because I needed her. She is an important person in my life. I needed her to update her stories about me as well, so I didn't have to constantly be coming into this conflict with the two of us in those stories.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. I also think it is one of those moments where you get to choose the story, right? I was just thinking to myself, okay, well, I had similar moments with my dad in life, right? So I'm the black sheep of the family, went out and built some stuff, right? But in doing so, I also angered and frustrated a lot of family members who didn't want to take the steps that I was going to have to take in order to get to the places which I wanted to get to. Not to mention the inside stories I was already telling myself about, well, maybe they're right. Maybe they're like this kind of thing. And it dawned on me that, when I was breaking free from homelessness, one of the interesting stories that I had was I had evidence supporting all the bad stuff. But then I said, do I want this to be my story moving forward? Do I want this to be my life? Do I want this to be my next step? And for the life of me, I couldn't come up with any reason why it should continue.
Yeah.
Right. So then it became, okay, what do I need to know, just as a mentor would do with a guide and a story, to get myself out of this position?
Well, and reinforcing, like searching back through, and there's a misconception that, like, if you're in a big dark story, negative story, that you need a story that is equally as light to get you out of that dark place. And that actually isn't the case.
One step.
It can be very small stories that you can, maybe it's, oh, this good thing happened. This was progress. Hold on to that story, retell it to yourself. Oh, this small thing happened. Hang on to that. If it's a relationship thing and I can't trust anybody and there's nobody, I'm completely unlovable. Think about the gas station attendant who always knows you by name and is excited to see you. Like, that matters. That story matters as we rebuild. So it doesn't have to be a big good story. It can be lots of little good stories that add up to the belief that will in turn lead to the action you want. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is most of the major things in your life happen because of micro steps, right?
Absolutely.
Way. So the other way I want to hit this is something I really took away from the book that I loved much, which is that your excuses come along with well-dressed. Right. They're well-dressed excuses, or they're in an environment that make themselves seem appealing.
Yeah.
Like, how do we break free from that massive excuse machine? I'm that guy. Like, I like to make excuses for myself.
It is. It's really, it's sometimes it's hard. That's one of the harder ones to break free from, because they're not just well dressed. They are like dressed to the nines, and they sound good when you say them. They sound good to yourself. They sound good to other people. And so they are really allowed to run around with free reign. But ultimately, it's one of those things where, and I find that these well-dressed excuses, when they reveal themselves for what they really are, it's one of those hits you like a ton of bricks kind of thing. And it kind of like, all of a sudden just comes out of nowhere, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's what this is, because this belief that you have, this well-dressed excuse, is actually keeping you from where you really want to go. So one of the excuses that I heard a lot as I was doing the research for this book was around health and well-being. So somebody who had particular weight loss goals and would say, the one woman was like, but I love my body, I love my body. I love my body no matter what my body looks like, which sounds great. And it is really good to love your body. But what she finally realized was that was giving her permission to do things to her body that didn't make her body feel good, right? It was, oh, I can eat this whole pizza. I can order the 5 different desserts and kind of eat all of them. It's, so it was but it sounds good, right? And these are all very, there's some that go, that I'm sure you probably heard that well-dressed excuse from someone, or maybe you yourself have said it. And then there can be also very personal. I discovered one not long ago that was, I like to be, it had a couple of different facets to it, but I like being underestimated. I like being underestimated. I like walking into a room and having people think that I'm not going to be great, or that, and then I realized that what that well-dressed, because it's like, and then I can come out and really show them. But what I realized that well-dressed excuse was doing to me was putting all the onus of greatness on the other person to discover my greatness. And then it meant that I didn't have to fully show up in my greatness. I just got to like sit back and let it be discovered, which, it's good to be humble. It's good there's aspects of it, but I realized that I was using that as an excuse to keep playing small. And now what to do about that, I haven't exactly figured that out. But the well-dressed excuses, those are tricky. And so anytime you feel yourself saying something, and you can feel that dissonance within yourself, you're saying something and it sounds good, but it's actually keeping you from what you really want. That's an opportunity to see if it's actually a well-dressed excuse.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that so much comes down to that moment of immediate self-awareness. Like, you're going about your day. Here's an opportunity that stands up before you for the first time. Maybe you meet someone at the gas station that can, help you get on the bestseller list or whatever.
Yeah.
Amazing contact, right? And you don't really know in that moment that you should choose a story, or you're in the autopilot phase.
Yeah.
What have you done, or what could you encourage us with to help us get out of autopilot so we can become more self-aware, to even start your process? Because the process itself that you outline in the book is brilliant. But I find the trickiest step is the very, very first one, right?
Yep, exactly. The very first step is to catch these stories that don't serve you in the act, to catch that you're telling yourself some negative stories. So what I would recommend, like the very first thing you could do is to be listening to yourself. So maybe set on my watch, it tells me to stand up. It dings me, makes me so, I know, the breathe when it makes me so annoyed. And now I've got the ring too that's like, oh, you should stretch your legs. So at any given moment, I'm getting all these like dings and zaps to do different things. But you can use those, or if you want to, you can set an alarm on your phone as little moments of awareness to say to yourself, what story am I telling myself right now? Or to notice moments in your day so moments in your day where you talk to yourself a lot. So if you have a commute, we often talk to ourselves on our commute. If you're a runner, now I go to spin class, and I don't usually tell myself many stories in spin class because I'm focused on the music. But when I run, I tell myself a lot of stories. I have entire conversations in my head that I'm only vaguely aware of. But pushing the pause button and actually tuning in. I know for me in the morning in the shower is when I can start. It's like, oh, wait, I've got this to do. And that's where some of the stories about what I'm capable of during a day can come up. So just throughout your day, to find those moments where your brain has the opportunity where it's talking and you could stop and actually listen to it. I would also recommend, because we have the same ones come up over and over again. Yeah. And so when you find yourself in that feeling of feeling stressed, feeling anxious about something, chances are there's a story there, and chances are it's a story that is on repeat. And so having a few, knowing what those stories are that are holding you back, and then having a few in your back pocket, good ones that you can tell yourself almost as instant antidotes. So if it's, oh, I'm not smart enough, and it happens anytime you're invited to a meeting, right before you walk into that meeting, have the stories that show that the brain power you have is adequate, or stories that show that you actually are smart, or, whatever it is, so that you come in equipped and ready.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It took me back to this one, back when I, like everybody else, was on Clubhouse for a while.
Not me. I will say, I was like,
you never did it.
No, I never did. Everyone's like, you got to get on Clubhouse. And I was like, I just don't.
I discovered it burned up too much of my day. 3 hours and one.
Yeah. See,
I'm more productive than this.
I could have told you that.
Yeah. But one of the guys that popped on, he was talking about, hey, look, I've been invited to this amazing program, private retreat, private mastermind with, people in 9-figure categories and up. He goes, I don't know what I'm doing there. I'm thinking to myself, dude, you got invited. Just show up.
Right.
Like, and it kind of dawned on that. Now, I will say that one of the things that's helped me kind of become more aware in my stories is actually my spouse. Mm-hmm. Right. My spouse sees different things that I don't see about myself: gifts, talents, strengths, struggles, all of that.
Absolutely.
So how do we open up to our spouse or our significant other about giving them permission to help us change our stories?
Yeah, I think that this is a really essential piece to success in this. And a lot of the people that were part of the research had either spouses, partners, or a confidant who was really close to them, that they would just happen to share their experience. And knowing to reach out, knowing that we do not see ourselves clearly. It's something that my mother has always said to me, which is so funny, because at first I was talking about these detrimental stories that my mother was telling me. But on the flip side, my mom is definitely one of those people that I go to when I am feeling less than, or that was a classic example of imposter syndrome, the person that you were just mentioning going to that retreat. And I can say to her, you know what, I really need I need some stories that remind me that I was born to do this. And she will tell stories back to me of things that I had forgotten or that were just kind of buried way back in there. Same with my spouse. And so once you read the book, once you wrap your head and you acquire this vocabulary, I guess, of understanding this through a story lens, it will equip you to better be able to help or ask for help. Because that is a big key to this success, is asking someone who can see you, who sees you in a different light, to tell stories back to you. And it sounds so selfish. It sounds so like self-serving, and it is, like, it's supposed to be, but we all need that help. And then at some point, now it's automatic for my husband and I, because we both speak this story language where I can see that he's struggling with something and I can tell him backstories. And this isn't just, no, you're really good at this, or, oh, you're so smart. I say, remember that time last year when so-and-so and so-and-so were doing this and you actually did that, like very specific, into the moment. But as you get going, definitely ask for help.
Yeah. No, choose your story, change your life. I think one of the things that it does so well is help teach you how to become aware and or set the intention. Right. I've discovered that when I can figure out the intention behind why I'm doing what I'm doing, that all of a sudden the what I'm doing begins to change to the why I should be doing it correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Well, and it's about, and I think in the exercise of self-awareness, there is an element of compassion.
Yeah.
Like, no wonder one of the one that I said is too raw today was a money story. And I remembered some old stories growing up about money and the way our family saw money and the way money was like programmed into me and our relationship with it. And just revisiting those stories, I was like, because I know the way that I'm thinking right now is not serving me, but instead of beating myself up about it, I can say, oh my gosh, no wonder. No wonder these are the stories that I'm made of. Like, no wonder I see it this way. So just that aspect of own personal compassion is a really powerful byproduct of this. And then, of course, compassion for other people, to know that any person you're talking to is a combination of the stories they're telling themselves. And if they haven't read the book, they may not know that that's really what's happening. Now, I will say, you cannot say to someone, you need to choose a better story, like in an accusatory way, because especially if there's someone who's already on this train, because it's really I know I need to find a better, I need time to be able to do it. So don't use it as a weapon, but there's some power there.
Is it okay to, when you go to choose your new story, is it okay to envision a story that maybe you haven't experienced yet?
That is a little bit risky, just because it's actually, when I outline the different options for choosing your story, it's the one I mentioned last, because it's the one most vulnerable to the inner critic, right? Who's like, but that hasn't happened, but that hasn't happened yet, but that didn't actually, it's saying to you, that's fiction. Whereas any of the others where you're choosing different stories from your past, or for example, your friend who is feeling really self-conscious or a heavy dose of imposter syndrome with going to this retreat. These are people that person admires and respects, and they invited this person. So to even tell yourself stories about these 9-figure earners that reinforce the admiration and respect you have for them and their decision making, which then it can validate their decision to have you there, because you can, right? But when you're creating fiction, because even your inner critic can't argue with those truths about those people, in which case they could still think the same. They could think the same thing about you, right? They make good decisions. They chose to have you here. It's where you get into the fictionalization that you're just a little bit more vulnerable. However, if you get very specific, and in the book I outline a different way to do that. It can work. I mean, of course, visualization. I mean, I'm sure you have your instances of things
Yeah.
that you visualized and
Yeah.
they came true. And
It took a lot longer than I thought they would. But yeah.
yeah. But they're just, those stories are more vulnerable. And so I wouldn't recommend starting there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good feedback. Because I think a lot of us, especially aspiring entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, we're always chasing the 9-figure exit,
Yeah.
the $1 billion business, like all the stuff. Meanwhile, we have a business to run. We have people we have to lead. We got team members that need to be encouraged. We got products that have to go out, systems that have to be built. And if we get too focused on the long range, that we can't actually do the things that create the long range.
Yep, exactly. And to get to the long range, and this is a challenge I see with and speaking for myself, I'm an entrepreneur, with the entrepreneur mindset of always looking ahead, always looking ahead, always looking ahead, is by nature, then we completely gloss over and we miss the positive, valuable stories of the successes that we've experienced thus far. And so then we miss key story opportunities that we can retell to ourselves that say, oh, wait, no, in that first phase of my business, I had this going against me, and I made it to here. And then I had this, and this, and I made it to here. But as we're always looking forward, we miss a lot of great story content that we can use as fuel to keep us going step by step to that, $1 billion exit or whatever it is.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with the goal.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, just make sure you see it in stages.
Exactly. Yep. Definitely.
Well, look, one of the things I've started asking recently of all the guests, is kind of my final question, is what their take is on becoming unstoppable. So I'm curious to know whether you can use the story framework or you can use something different. What does it mean to truly become unstoppable?
I mean, I know, and I think we would all agree that while there are outside forces that can stop us, really what it comes down to is the only thing that can stop us is ourselves, and not even necessarily our physical selves. The thing that can stop us is the thing that we think, the things that we think about ourselves. Yeah. And so if we can shift that thinking to positive thinking about ourselves and recognizing our strengths, recognizing where we've come from, how far we've come, recognizing those little moments of victories, that belief is built from the inside out, which then enables you to be able to move forward and not be stopped. But it has to come from within, and it has to be intentional. And that's what the stories are there for.
That's awesome. Kindra, thank you so much. I seriously enjoyed this. The reality is Choose Your Story, Change Your Life is out right now. Do you have a specific place that you like to send people to for books? I know it's available everywhere, but
it's available everywhere. I mean, you can support local bookstores. Certainly, I think it's the cheapest on Amazon. That's how that goes. I mean, if I'm just being honest,
has no take on that, the content inside of it.
I know, but no, not at all. That's already set. But and then you can go to chooseyourstorychangeyourlife.com. And fill out your info after you order the book, and I'll send you a book plate so you can have a signed copy.
That's very cool.
And then you'll be on the list to get all the announcements. We have a lot of cool things coming up. So you'll be the first to know about all those.
Awesome. Kindra, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Loved it.
All right. Take care. Peace. Now, if you like this content that you just got through watching, I know you're going to love this one right here. So check it out.
Want to be better in any area of your life? First, get crystal clear on the basics and then work towards mastery of those during the unseen hours. When it comes to behaviors, we need to figure out what is going to help us get where it is that we're trying to go and to become the person that we're trying to become. And sometimes there'll be a tremendous amount of overlap amongst others. Sometimes there won't be.